Really excited to introduce Jalen Scott. He is a senior marine biology major. Yeah, he took a course with me in freshwater biology last fall. And the project that I assigned the students is a large literature review in which they look to determine through this literature review, what do we actually know about a particular topic? So when you think about repeatability in science, it's not just running trials, it is the consensus of information based on the researchers that look at that particular field. And through finding a consensus, you also find the data gaps and the questions that remain. So I'm going to let Jalen explain his topic and what he chose to talk about. And through his work, and go for it.
My project, I chose the link between wetland degradation and its effect on basically amphibians biodiversity. Please word. All right. Starting off, I'm gonna just have to explain what a wetland is. You've probably heard in the swamps or bogs. They are marine systems, not marine, they are aquatic systems. The one I'm focusing on are specifically freshwater wetlands, and they are aquatic systems that house a lot of organisms, flora and fauna, such as plants, and what I'm talking about, amphibians, and fish as well. And they are very good for our environment because they sequester carbon, which helps for climate change, and they also cleanse water. But they have their own sort of filtration systems that they use for the plants. And as you can see here, I'm gonna focus on the, I have a small map. It won't let me zoom anymore. Oh gosh. So this is basically the wetlands worldwide. I did a worldwide review, but I wanna start by saying that most of them were in Asia and North America because that's all I could find. That's how you know that people don't really study these types of things. So we're going to be focusing mainly here and here, and in some parts of Africa, specifically Ghana and Ethiopia. So the way I went around doing this is I compiled 35 scientific papers. I use things such as Science Direct, and I use Google Scholar a little bit, but unfortunately, since it's so hard to find these type of things, it's hard for Google Scholar it's hard to kind of focus in on one type of topic. It basically gave me any paper that had the word wetland in it. And I use library as well. I use the specific keywords of wetland restoration, wetland biodiversity, and amphibian biodiversity. And for this study, my main amphibians were frogs, due to not a lot of data being on salamanders, unfortunately. I don't know if I should, yeah. Everyone knows what a salamander is? Okay, I have to ask, I'm sorry. I differentiated them by their design, their date published, and their location, like where the study occurred, and the outcomes that were collected. So I compiled these into a Google Sheets file, and I plugged through the data, and these were, oh my gosh, and these were my results. So here are the specific factors that I focused on. So wetland health, meaning how healthy is the wetland? Is there pollution? Is there pollution? Is it isolated from like urban environments? And for my second factor, I chose the wetland description, which was what type of wetland is it? So like I said earlier, an urban wetland obviously would have less biodiversity than an isolated wetland where there's less human activity, in theory. So going to the wetland health part on the left. So the way I kind of said it was I tried to differentiate if there was a link, if there was a negative link or no link between wetland health and biodiversity, between 16 of the papers which focused on specifically wetland health and biodiversity. And the majority of them were mostly negative, with a couple of them having no link. But the no link papers they didn't really delve too much into the experiment. Most of the results were inconclusive. And in the pie chart below, that is the methods for all of the papers. So most of them were empirical field, and only a couple used modeling, which they tried to use a computer model to, how do I say this, they tried to model the effects of degradation on wetlands and how it would affect biodiversity by using a computer model rather than going out into the field and trying to find these amphibians themselves. Moving on to here are my wetland characteristics and diversity. So like I said earlier, wetland characteristics is just what type of wetland, what's it surrounded by, and I showed there were 19 papers surrounding these, and there was a pretty even split of negative link and positive linked. I should explain this. So obviously negative link means that generally a wetland with bad characteristics obviously is going to lead to lower biodiversity, and a positive link is healthier wetlands. Healthier wetlands lead to more biodiversity, and the mixed column at the top was papers that tried to do both, but also didn't come to conclusive evidence, mainly due to such things as error, or they feel like they didn't have enough information to come up with an outcome. And here are the methods for this. Some of these use empirical lab methods, which mostly led to they use things such as genetics to try to find these species, because salamanders are kind of hard to find in general, and it's not very smart to go look for 6 hours and say you don't find any, but your friend finds 10, and then obviously in your head you're like, okay, there's no salamanders here. And you don't want to skew perspective. Here's my discussion section. So the correlation, obviously, between wetland health and biodiversity was apparent, with obviously healthier wetlands leading to more biodiversity in amphibians, and degraded habitats having a negative link within biodiversity of amphibians. Like I explained earlier, not all reached negative conclusions. Some determined a positive link between geographically isolated wetlands, meaning that they're away from civilization. So places like, let's say, I don't want to say anything dumb, like they're not near any civilization, or if they are near civilization, it's like small cities or like undeveloped cities. Like I stated earlier, the lack of empirical surveys targeting wetland health and biodiversity suggests a difficulty in researching these aspects. Going back to what I said earlier, no one really tried to find, I only found like 3 papers on specifically salamanders. Most of them were on frogs. Obviously, to advance these studies, we need more research to be found. I think a way to be doing that is, like I said, how the wetland characteristics paper, some of them use empirical lab surveys, which they try to use genetics from water samples. However, it's not very accurate, because obviously you're going to get everything else in the water. Finally, it is difficult to find studies focused on mainly wetland health and biodiversity without overlapping into a broader examination of biodiversity within wetlands. So, like I said, when I was looking for my papers, basically anything with wetland came up. Wetland and conservation, specifically wetlands. We need to save the wetlands, and most of them involving actual species were either plants or fish, freshwater fish. And some included turtles, and very few included amphibians, unfortunately. And are there any questions?
I have a question. Do you foresee using this information for anything you plan to do in your future, whether it be education or career?
I'm not specifically into amphibians, but I am into conservation.
Okay.
And I think for certain animals that are given less love than others, I think this would be a good indicator of how to deal with those things, what we need to work on.
Thank you.
Really. sorry.
Yeah, I think you may have explained it, but I'm gonna ask it again, because I don't think I the empirically filled data sets, you have the data set novel, survey, empirically filled. What is the empirically filled? What's going on with those?
So basically they went into the field and they went to try to find specific species which varied in quality. Obviously if you look for frogs, it's easier. And for the ones that I found with specifically salamanders, they had inconclusive evidence. So they basically tried to, however much of this is an indicator of
Oh, okay, so
whether or
what
not
we found indicates this thing would be here probably, or something like that.
in theory.
Okay, okay, I got it now, I see. I wasn't sure what empirically filled, I was trying to figure out how that fit in the model, so.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, this is fascinating, thank you. I was wondering about your wetland characteristics. I think you said that you were looking at whether it was sort of an urban wetland or a rural wetland. Were there any other characteristics that you looked at? Because I know there's a whole bunch of different types of marshes and bogs and.
They just considered, most of the papers didn't specify what type, it was just wetlands in general. But the way I broke it down in simple terms was urban and non-urban, because it did go into a lot more detail, but I would have a very big pie chart. So I just decided to simplify it for this presentation. And in the future, if there was more research, I think we could break it down by specific types or locations.
All right, well, let's thank our speaker. Oh,
You have a question?
Why is it important to look at amphibians for diversity?
Because amphibians are great bioindicators of the environment. They have permeable skin, so if they're dying, there must be something wrong because they absorb everything into their bodies. So if there's low water quality, they're gonna suffer.
all right. Well, our next speaker will be in about 3 minutes.